The Sioux represent one of the most prominent and ancient Native American tribes in North America, with origins tracing back approximately 2,000 to 3,000 years. At the height of their influence, their territory extended over thousands of square miles, establishing them as one of the most recognized and significant tribes in the history of the United States. The ancestral Sioux are believed to have initially inhabited the central Mississippi Valley region before migrating to Minnesota. Shortly before 800 AD return, they moved into the northern forests of central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin from the central Mississippi River. By around 1300 AD, they had adopted the traits of a northern tribal society and became known as the Seven Council Fires, which comprised seven distinct bands. These original bands were formed based on kinship, dialect, and geographic closeness. Today, various groups descend from these original seven bands and maintain their own governance. The three largest divisions of the Sioux Nation are the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota. It is important to note that some historians suggest that the Nakota were once part of the Dakota. These three divisions also represent the primary languages spoken within the Sioux community. In any of these dialects, Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota translates to friend or ally, highlighting the alliances among the bands. Like many Native American tribes, the Sioux hold a belief that animals are akin to relatives, fostering a profound connection among all living entities, including plants, animals, spirits, and humans. It is widely accepted that the Great Spirit is the creator and unifier of all that exists within the universe. The principal cultural figure among the Dakota is the white buffalo calf woman, who served as a mediator between the Great Spirit and humanity. She imparted teachings on how to foster good relationships, introducing the seven sacred rites along with the sacred pipe. These seven ceremonies include the Purification Lodge, the Vision Quest, the Sun Dance, the Making of Relatives, the Female Puberty Ceremony, the Ball Throwing Ceremony, and Soul Keeping. Prior to the 1600s, the Dakota inhabited the region surrounding Lake Superior, where they engaged in the gathering of wild rice and other food sources, hunted deer and buffalo, and fished from canoes. However, during the 1700s, conflicts with the Ojibwa tribe to the east forced the Dakota to migrate to what is now southern and western Minnesota, an area then occupied by the agricultural Lakota and Nakota. Subsequently, the Lakota and Nakota relocated to the present-day states of North and South Dakota. As horses became prevalent on the plains during this era, the Lakota and Nakota transitioned from agriculture to a lifestyle focused on the nomadic hunting of buffalo. Traditionally, they shared numerous cultural traits with other nomadic Native American societies of the plains. Their dwellings were teepees, and their attire was crafted from leather, suede, or fur. They engaged in trade, exchanging buffalo products for corn cultivated by the farming tribes of the plains. The Sioux frequently conducted raids on these agricultural tribes, particularly targeting the Mandan, Arikara, Hidatsa, and Pawnee, which ultimately led these tribes to form alliances with the U.S. military against the Sioux. Historically, the Sioux lived in camps composed of extended families, fostering a strong sense of community. A designated leader played a crucial role in cultivating a profound sense of identity and belonging within the camp. Daily life in these communities revolved around subsistence activities that were divided according to age and gender. Hunting, warfare, and the creation of tools and weapons were primarily the duties of men, who also engaged in trading, participating in councils, attending ceremonies, and enjoying leisure activities such as horse racing. Women, on the other hand, were tasked with gathering wild resources like prairie turnips, processing and tanning animal hides, cooking, sewing, engaging in quill work, and managing the household's daily needs. They were responsible for dismantling camps, loading belongings onto travois, and re-establishing the camp at the end of each day. Older children and young individuals often took on the responsibilities of collecting firewood and water, as well as caring for horses and dogs. Grandparents and elders typically held the primary role of looking after small children and infants, while also assisting with household chores. In Lakota society, men had the option to take multiple wives, with those of higher status frequently having several spouses. The initial interactions with settlers and relations with the Ojibway were significant. In the 1600s, the Dakota Sioux engaged in trade with French merchants, similar to other tribes of the era. The French sought to establish dominance in the North American fur trade, competing against the English. The Ojibway, Potawatomi, and Ottawa tribes were among the first to engage in trade with the French. The first documented encounter between the Sioux and the French took place when explorers Radisson and Groseilliers arrived in what is now Wisconsin during the winter of 1659 to 1660. The relationship between the Sioux and the Ojibway was complex. In 1679, a diplomatic alliance was formed between the Sioux and the Ojibway at Fond du Lac, located in present-day Minnesota. The Ojibway agreed to supply the Sioux with goods from the fur trade, and in exchange, the Sioux allowed the Ojibway to migrate westward toward the Mississippi River. This period of peace endured for 57 years. The Ojibway and Sioux historically collaborated in hunting, formed familial bonds, shared spiritual practices, and thrived together. However, over time, the Dakota developed animosity towards the Ojibway for trading with their traditional adversaries, the Cree and Assiniboine, with whom they were in conflict. The French exacerbated the situation by manipulating both groups. By the 1720s, tensions escalated, culminating in warfare in 1736. The Sioux, no longer reliant on the Ojibway for trade goods, began to resent their presence in the region. The Ojibway, having inhabited the area for nearly 3 generations, were determined to defend the territory they had initially entered as guests. The Sioux-Ojibway War, which commenced in 1736, became one of the most enduring conflicts in North American history. It established a continuous front extending from central Wisconsin through Minnesota to the Red River of the North. By obstructing all travel and trade along this front, the war significantly impacted the fur trade, redirecting traders to safer northern routes, much to the benefit of the Cree and Ojibway, while simultaneously restricting European access to the Sioux market. The Ojibway expanded their territory to control the waterways from Grand Portage to Rainy Lake, establishing their primary settlement at the latter location. From this strategic position, they began advancing southward towards Sioux settlements at Leech Red and Sandy Lakes. Within 4 decades, they would claim all of northern Minnesota. A notable confrontation between the Sioux and Ojibway occurred in 1770 at the Dalles of the Sioux-Ojibway. According to Métis historian William Whipple Warren, the conflict ignited when the Meskwaki tribe, traditional foes of the Ojibway, engaged them near St. Croix Falls. The Dakota, once adversaries of the Meskwaki, were recruited to join forces in a coordinated assault against the Ojibway, with the Meskwaki initiating the encounter against the large Ojibway war party. The Meskwaki reportedly taunted the Dakota, urging them to refrain from engagement as they claimed they would swiftly defeat their adversaries. Initially, the Sioux held an advantage in the conflict until reinforcements from the Ojibway arrived. Despite significant casualties on both the Sioux and Ojibway sides, the Meskwaki suffered the highest number of fatalities. Ultimately, the Ojibway emerged triumphant, gaining control over the upper St. Croix, which established an informal boundary between the Sioux and Ojibway near the mouth of the Snake River. The Dakota Sioux were compelled to abandon their ancestral territories around Leech Lake and Mille Lacs, retreating southward along the Mississippi River and the St. Croix River Valley due to the ongoing conflicts. As the Lakota and Nakota Sioux migrated westward into the prairies, they assimilated various customs from the neighboring Plains tribes, leading to the development of new cultural practices centered around the horse and fur trade. Conversely, the Dakota Sioux preserved many characteristics of their woodland heritage. By 1803, the 3 divisions of the Sioux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, had established themselves in their respective environments, each cultivating unique lifestyles. Nevertheless, they maintained strong connections due to shared cultural elements. In the context of life and warfare in the West, the Sioux, having faced encroachment from the Ojibway, exhibited fierce resistance to further intrusions into their newly acquired territory. This territory faced increasing challenges as the colonial frontier advanced westward beyond the Mississippi River in the mid-19th century. The California Gold Rush of 1849 resulted in a surge of travelers, prompting many Sioux to become wary of the U.S. government's efforts to establish the Bozeman Trail and other routes through their sovereign lands. The signing of the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851 permitted safe passage for settlers along the Oregon Trail. Yet it regrettably marked a disruption of peace. In 1854, a cow belonging to a Mormon group escaped and wandered into a Sioux camp. The Mormons, upon searching for the animal, became apprehensive upon encountering the Native Americans. They returned to their camp and informed the army at Fort Laramie about the incident, stating that the cow had been taken. Lieutenant John Grattan led a contingent into the village, attempting to apprehend the individual he accused of killing the cow. When the accused asserted his innocence, Grattan commanded the firing of cannons, resulting in the death of Chief Conquering Bear, the Sioux spokesperson. In response, the Sioux launched a counter-offensive, annihilating the entire detachment. As a consequence, in September 1855, General William S. Harney mobilized 600 troops and attacked a Sioux village at Blue Water, resulting in the deaths of 85 individuals and the capture of 70 women and children. Meanwhile, in the eastern regions, the Sioux faced relentless encroachment from settlers eager to claim their land. In August 1862, the Sioux initiated raids on settlements and trading posts, with Chief Little Crow leading multiple assaults on Fort Ridgely. The troops stationed within the fort retaliated with howitzers, inflicting casualties on as many as 100 warriors. The Sioux persisted in their raids, drawing the attention of General Henry H. Sibley, who arrived at Fort Ridgely with 1,500 troops. Although Little Crow led several successful raids, the army eventually advanced against the Sioux, and at Wood Lake, the warriors were outmatched by the artillery. Many of the dispersed Sioux managed to escape to the Dakota Territory or further into Canada. Those who remained faced dire consequences, as President Abraham Lincoln ordered their execution. On December 26, 1862, in Mankato, Minnesota, the largest mass execution in American history occurred, resulting in the hanging of 38 Dakota Sioux members. Following the Civil War, a new trail discovered by John Bozeman attracted more miners and settlers to Montana. This trail significantly reduced travel time from the east but traversed the core hunting grounds of the Cheyenne and Sioux. Consequently, the Sioux allied with the Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho to conduct raids against settlers and military patrols along the trail. In 1866, Red Cloud and other chiefs convened with Army officers at Fort Laramie to deliberate on the implications of the new trail. They returned to their encampment and reported the incident to the forces at Fort Laramie, indicating that a cow had been stolen. Lieutenant John Grattan led a group into the village with the intention of apprehending the person he believed responsible for the cow's death. When the accused claimed he was innocent, Grattan ordered the firing of cannons, which resulted in the death of Chief Conquering Bear, the representative of the Sioux. In retaliation, the Sioux launched a counterattack, completely decimating the entire detachment. Consequently, in September 1855, General William S. Harney assembled 600 soldiers and assaulted a Sioux village at Blue Water, leading to the deaths of 85 individuals and the capture of 70 women and children. Simultaneously, in the eastern territories, the Sioux faced continuous encroachment from settlers eager to claim their lands. In August 1862, the Sioux began conducting raids on settlements and trading posts, with Chief Little Crow spearheading several attacks on Fort Ridgely. The troops stationed at the fort responded with howitzers, causing casualties among approximately 100 warriors. Despite the ongoing raids, General Henry H. Sibley took notice and arrived at Fort Ridgely with 1,500 troops. Although Little Crow achieved some initial successes, the army ultimately advanced against the Sioux, and at Wood Lake, the warriors were outgunned by the artillery. Many of the fleeing Sioux managed to escape to the Dakota Territory or further into Canada. Those who remained faced severe repercussions as President Abraham Lincoln ordered their execution. On December 26, 1862, in Mankato, Minnesota, the largest mass execution in American history took place, resulting in the hanging of 38 members of the Dakota Sioux. After the Civil War, a new route discovered by John Bozeman attracted an influx of miners and settlers to Montana. This trail significantly shortened travel time from the east but cut through the essential hunting grounds of the Cheyenne and Sioux. The Sioux soon allied with the Northern Cheyenne and Northern Arapaho to conduct raids against settlers and military patrols along the trail. In 1866, Red Cloud and several other chiefs convened with Army officers at Fort Laramie to address the implications of the new trail. While some chiefs agreed to a non-aggression treaty, Red Cloud departed to prepare for conflict. The Army aimed to bolster Fort Reno and establish two additional forts, Fort Phil Kearny and Fort C.F. Smith, along the Bozeman Trail. In the same year, Crazy Horse successfully misled a group of soldiers dispatched to gather firewood. The soldiers, believing the Sioux were heading in one direction, inadvertently walked into an ambush when they attempted to evade the warriors. A relief contingent led by Captain William Fetterman also fell victim to a trap, resulting in the loss of the entire 80-man unit. Subsequently, more soldiers were deployed, this time equipped with breech-loading rifles, a new weapon that allowed for quicker and easier loading. As the warriors pursued both groups back to their forts, both sides incurred significant casualties. Ultimately, with the Transcontinental Railroad nearing completion south of the Platte, the government conceded. The signing of the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868 fulfilled Red Cloud's demand for the abandonment of the Bozeman forts in exchange for a cessation of raids. Once the forts were vacated, the Sioux set them ablaze. The arrival of the railroad began to threaten the buffalo, a vital resource for the Plains natives. Not only were the buffalo being frightened away by the new railroad, but soldiers and settlers were also hunting them in vast numbers. By the 1870s, both parties had breached the terms of the Fort Laramie Treaty, and discussions regarding a new railroad line, the Northern Pacific, began to attract additional settlers to the region. The discovery of gold in the Sioux Sacred Black Hills in 1874 marked the beginning of a new conflict. Native leaders Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse rallied their warriors, while General William T. Sherman and General Philip H. Sheridan commanded the Army troops. Tensions escalated when the military mandated that native hunting bands either return to the reservations or be labeled as hostiles. In March 1876, the native warriors achieved a significant victory at the Powder River in Montana, inflicting heavy casualties on the Army. Subsequently, a coordinated military campaign was initiated, with General George Crook advancing from the south, Colonel John Gibbon from the west, and General Alfred Terry alongside Colonel George A. Custer from the east. On June 17, 1876, Crazy Horse led 700 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors against General Crook's 1,000-man contingent. The native forces executed well-coordinated attacks, forcing Crook's troops to retreat to their base with substantial losses. The Sioux and Cheyenne then regrouped in a meadow known as Greasy Grass, situated along the Little Bighorn River, where their encampment swelled to 7,000 individuals, including approximately 1,800 warriors. On June 21st, the columns of Terry and Gibbon converged. Major Marcus Reno's scouting party identified the general location of the native camp, prompting Terry to dispatch Custer's 7th Cavalry to intercept them, while the remaining forces approached from the north. Upon locating the encampment, Custer opted for an immediate assault rather than waiting for reinforcements. This decision proved catastrophic, as on June 25th, Custer's entire contingent of around 200 men was annihilated. This marked the final significant victory for the native leaders Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Chief Gall. The subsequent 6 months would prove to be calamitous for the natives, as both the Sioux and Cheyenne faced numerous defeats and significant losses in personnel. As a consequence, Sitting Bull and his followers sought refuge in Canada. Crazy Horse capitulated in 1877, but was subsequently killed while resisting orders for his confinement. Sitting Bull returned in 1881 and surrendered at Fort Buford, later being relocated to the Standing Rock Agency, where he was killed in 1890 while opposing arrest. The concluding events of the conflicts unfolded in 1890 when Wovoka, a mystic from the Paiute tribe, initiated the ghost dance movement. He proclaimed that the ghost dance would restore the world to its former state, resurrect the deceased, return the buffalo, and expel all white settlers from the plains. To realize this vision, Native American warriors were encouraged to participate in the ghost dance. For the impoverished, defeated, and disillusioned individuals, many of whom resided on reservations, this new faith offered a glimmer of hope. It was also believed that the ghost dance shirts would shield the wearer from bullets fired by white men. In November 1890, the U.S. government prohibited the ghost dance on Sioux reservations, and Indian police were instructed to apprehend Sitting Bull, a fervent advocate of the movement. During the ensuing confrontation, Sitting Bull and 6 of his warriors lost their lives. Bigfoot was also targeted for arrest, but before the soldiers could reach him, he and his followers departed for the Pine Ridge Agency. General Nelson Miles, now commanding the Division of the Missouri, dispatched the 7th Cavalry under Major S.M. Whitside to intercept the Sioux band. When the cavalry eventually located the tribe, the soldiers instructed them to set up camp for the night at Wounded Knee Creek. On the morning of December 29th, while Bigfoot and other leaders were in discussions with Army officers, a rifle was accidentally discharged. Colonel James Forsyth, who had arrived to assume command, ordered the troops to open fire. Artillery was deployed to target individuals, men, women, and children, attempting to escape the devastation. Over 250 lives were lost, including that of Bigfoot, marking the conclusion of nearly 4 decades of struggle by the Sioux to preserve their territory and way of life. In the 20th and 21st centuries, following the cessation of hostilities, the government compelled tribes to send their children to boarding schools. These institutions aimed to kill the Indian to save the man, signifying an effort to dismantle native societies. Children were separated from their families, dressed in American attire, assigned English names, had their hair cut, and were prohibited from speaking their native languages. Their spiritual practices and ceremonies were also banned. The objective was to impart academic knowledge in English and vocational skills aligned with American society, thereby replacing traditional ways of living. These boarding schools were often overcrowded and suffered from inadequate sanitary conditions, resulting in the spread of infectious diseases and instances of students fleeing or succumbing to illness. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act aimed to reverse many previous policies by shifting away from the cultural assimilation of tribes into American society. It abolished land allotment, prohibited involuntary land seizure, acknowledged tribal governments, encouraged the establishment of tribal constitutions, and empowered Native peoples to oversee their own resources. From 1934 to 1945, tribes had the opportunity to vote on their governmental constitutions, although some opted to retain their older frameworks. Throughout the 20th century, the government enacted a limited number of laws that both benefited and harmed Native communities. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, Native Americans established the American Indian movement. Conflicting political ideologies have fostered enduring tensions within the reservations. Allegations of corruption against tribal leaders culminated in the Wounded Knee Siege, which commenced on February 27, 1973, when adherents of the American Indian movement took control of the town of Wounded Knee, South Dakota. The occupation persisted for 71 days, during which various state and federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and the United States Marshal Service, besieged the area. Indigenous individuals protested against what they perceived as a corrupt local government alongside broader federal issues impacting Native reservation communities. Native Americans from numerous other regions, particularly urban centers, rallied to support the occupation. The siege resulted in 12 injuries, including one FBI agent who was left paralyzed, while 2 individuals lost their lives and 2 others went missing. Following the Wounded Knee incident, the Sioux continued their advocacy for tribal rights and self-determination. Regarding the Black Hills occupation, the Indian Claims Commission, U.S. Congress, and the Supreme Court addressed the matter in 1980, determining that the federal government had unlawfully seized the Black Hills and awarded over $100 million in reparations to the tribes. Asserting that the land was never for sale, the Sioux declined to accept the compensation, which has since exceeded $1 billion. Early 21st century population estimates indicated approximately 170,000 individuals of Sioux heritage.